You've never heard of this case before, and you've probably never even seen this CPU or GPU combo as well.
Who?
Today's $500 gaming PC build is all about going slightly off meta, but still putting together a very capable and powerful 1080p build. There's no Ryzen 5 3600s, 5600s, and not even an RX 5700 XT in this one.
Nope.
We've been crushing the pure performance build guide content lately, but the truth is that if you want the absolute best FPS per dollar kind of system, there's specific parts that you should be using. While that's true, what we often forget is that not everybody has to go down that route. So today's build is for the people that want to go down the road less traveled. We'll talk about all the parts inside of here and of course benchmark a ton of different games with it, all after a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by GVG Mall, and you probably already know that I've been using them for so long to activate Windows on a ton of my own builds. They're actually running a huge sale right now, which boosts my normal 18% discount up to 25% off if you use code ZTT18, and I'll have that linked at the top of the description. They not only have Windows keys, but also a ton of other stuff such as Office, and even game keys for platforms like Steam, Origin, and Uplay, and they even have console stuff too, like PSN prepaid cards as well. Activating Windows is super simple and only takes like 3 minutes total, so activate Windows today and remove that nasty watermark, and don't forget to use ZTT18 for 25% off. Alright, so for a $500 build guide, I gotta go against every instinct in my body to not use a CPU such as the Ryzen 5 5500 or 5600. To be fair, those are just hands down some of the best options for this price range build because the price to performance is amazing and there's a lot of upgrade potential as well. Instead though, we're shifting gears over to Team Blue specifically for this off-meta build.
I'm afraid I just blew myself.
And we're going with the Intel i3 12100F. Now, we're not going crazy here. The 12100F is still a very powerful gaming CPU for its price range, and it's still a great option. I wouldn't consider it meta anymore, but make no mistake, this is still a great budget choice. The 12100F can still dominate in 1080p gaming even with the CPU demanding titles. Now, normally I talk about the motherboard directly after talking about the CPU, but for today's video, we have to talk about the case next because we can't talk about the motherboard until we talk about the case. This thing was a mess. This here is the 7 Hero EMBL Black, and wow, for those of you that were watching the Twitch live stream of me building this PC, you all were in for a treat. First up, on paper, this actually looks like a very solid deal. I paid $81 for it brand new off Amazon, and this is a very clean and minimal all black micro ATX case that comes with 3 pre-installed ARGB fans. Now, just like you, I've never even heard of 7 Hero before, but I was willing to take the gamble for an off-meta type of build. It honestly sounded perfect. During the stream, however, we ran into a couple of problems. The first one wasn't a huge deal because it came with some very weird RGB cabling where it included a 2-pin connector, which typically goes into an RGB hub, but the case didn't come with a hub. This tripped me up for a bit, especially since it did come with a 2-pin reset switch, but we just ended up not using that extra connector and everything turned out okay. Where we ran into an actual roadblock for completing this PC though was with the motherboard sizing. I initially was using the MSI Pro B760M-P, which is a very typical micro ATX motherboard, but it ended up being too big for this case.
It looks decent. I just found a problem.
Again, this is just a standard size board, but it ended up covering up the hole where the 24-pin power cable came out of, and there was literally no room for that connector and cable anywhere else. If you look closely, the motherboard was actually slightly overlapping the fans as well. During the stream, I didn't want to stop the build, so I started playing around with the option of routing the 24-pin from the bottom or even up at the top of the case, but it just looked so crazy that I had to scrap the project, and for the first time in possibly ever, I couldn't finish the build for a Thirsty Thursday live stream. What we discovered is that there's actually 2 different sizes for micro ATX motherboards, and the super cheap options that only have 2 RAM slots are what this case is designed for. Micro ATX motherboards can be anywhere from 6.9 inches all the way up to 9.6 inches. There's no letter or symbol designation for that smaller size though, and nobody knows those inches and dimensions off of the top of their head. The case's Amazon page also doesn't mention anything about this other than the fact that it's just for micro ATX motherboards, so honestly, I think that this was just a humongous oversight on the manufacturer, and it's probably one of the reasons why nobody has heard of this case brand before. So after the stream, we were able to swap it out with this ASRock B760M-HDV, and this is indeed one of those ultra cheap 7.9-inch motherboards, and after that, things went pretty smoothly. Regardless though, definitely do not buy this case. The only reason I was willing to take the gamble was because this was for an off-meta build, but I quickly got my lesson of why you probably should buy meta products. For micro ATX builds, I really like the DIY PC ARGB Q3 as well as the Sama ARGB Q5. Those would be much better alternatives, and they're even cheaper. Moving on past the case and motherboard issues though, honestly everything else was pretty streamlined. For RAM, we're going with the Mushkin Redline 16GB DDR4 kit that's clocked at 3600 MHz, and this all black kit was priced at just $37 on Newegg. Now remember, you still can go with DDR5 with Intel 12th gen CPUs, but for a $500 build, I don't think the extra price for a more expensive motherboard or RAM is particularly worth it, so that's why I'm sticking with DDR4. After that, we have the SSD, and this was simply just the cheapest Gen 4 1TB NVMe drive that I could find at the time, which is the Clev Crass C910 for $61 on Amazon. This Clev Crass lineup has honestly solidified itself as a reliable choice for ultra budget builds over the last few years, and I do like that the heatsink comes removed in the box because you don't need to use it if your motherboard has a heatsink included on it. Nice touch. Moving on, we have the power supply, and this is certainly a budget meta, which is the Apevia Prestige 600 watt. This continues to be one of the cheapest Tier C models available for around the $50 mark, and it's almost always available on Amazon every day of the week. I of course also plugged in some cable extensions though, and today we're staying off meta with this Vitro teal and black set. Now I know some of the PC flippers in the ZTT Discord server like using Vitro, but for extensions, I'm personally usually staying with Asia Horse and Easy DIY these days. I don't really have a problem with Vitro specifically, although I do think I had broken extensions arrive years ago, so I haven't used them since. More importantly, I just wanted the color scheme that this brand had because I'm pairing this with the stock Intel cooler that's on top of our 12100F. This stock CPU cooler is certainly plenty of cooling for an Intel i3, and as long as you tailor the color scheme of the build around this color, it actually doesn't look too bad. Obviously, I do wish that they just made it all black like the Ryzen coolers, but using this teal blue every now and then is pretty cool. The overall color scheme of the build is what I'm also trying to keep off meta because unlike most builds, we're not just relying on the RGB products to give us the color. The combination of the cooler, extensions, and some RGB fans is what brings this whole thing together, and honestly, over the last few months, I kind of got away from this style. Back in the day, I used to always use crazy colors for the extensions, but lately I've been sticking to black or white and then just using the RGB products for my color.
It's still fine, but you've lost your edge, your focus, your dedication.
The way we're doing it today is the better option in my opinion, provided you are now locked into one color scheme and you don't have as much of flexibility. Driving this build home though is the graphics card, and this is what's going to set us up for some amazing price and performance. This is the Milsea RX 6600M, and I actually do have a dedicated video on this bad boy. If you didn't already see the video, some Chinese companies over on AliExpress are taking the mobile versions of GPU chips and slapping them onto new desktop GPU parts, and the end product is actually pretty special. During our testing, this 6600M beat our normal RX 6600 in several titles, but it was neck and neck close for absolutely all of them. We're essentially getting the performance of a $200 RX 6600, which is already incredibly valuable, but for only $150 on AliExpress. All in all, here's what the final parts list is looking like, and I didn't realize until after the motherboard drama that this sailed over my initial budget, which got closer to $600. I do think that if you chose a meta case, motherboard for sure, and maybe got a deal on something else, you would be able to get close to $500 without a problem. But yeah, we went a little over budget this time for mine. Now, I will be selling this build for about $400 over on zttbuilds.com/drop for our June 1st monthly drop. Just as a reminder, if you want priority access to the website before everyone else, you have to be a Discord exclusive, which you can do by joining the ZTT Discord server and going up to the server subscriptions tab. But let's see what this build can do, and we first fired up 3D Mark's Time Spy, and this cranked out a score of 7,738. Compared to our $585 total build price, this was about a 13x multiplier, which is pretty decent, but it's definitely not as good as some of the pure performance build guides that we cranked out over a few weeks ago. Next up, we tested Helldivers 2, and when using 1080p in high settings, we still got just over that target 60 FPS mark. For Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 in 1080p balance settings, we got 166 FPS, so we can fully saturate a 165Hz monitor if we have one. And here in Cyberpunk 2077, we could keep the settings at 1080p high, and we still got 67 FPS. Definitely not too shabby for a $150 graphics card from AliExpress. AliExpress. Here's the rest of the games that we tested, and honestly, this is all very impressive. Despite not using the most min-maxy parts available, we're still getting a 1080p high-quality experience for less than $600 total. This was definitely a fun project to just mix it up and do something different every now and then, but if you do want to figure out how to min-max your FPS per dollar value, then feel free to click the Pure Performance Build Guide playlist, which is on the screen now.